Never thought a trip to the accountant's office would be the thing that saved my life. It was a Tuesday in February, one of those flat gray mornings in Tucson where the sky can't decide whether it wants to be winter or spring. My accountant, Ed Briggs, had called the week before and asked me to come in to go over some discrepancies in my tax return. He said it in that careful, measured way accountants have when they don't want to alarm you over the phone. "Just come in," he'd said. "Better if we talk face to face." I assumed it was something boring, a missing 1099 maybe, an error on a deduction. I'd been retired for 2 years by then, and my finances were straightforward. A pension from 31 years teaching high school history, Social Security, a modest IRA I'd been drawing down carefully. Nothing complicated. Nothing that should have caused Ed's voice to go that particular shade of quiet. "My name is Alan Mercer. I'm 64 years old, and until that February morning I believed I was a lucky man. I'd been married to my wife for 4 years by then. We'd met at a retirement dinner for a mutual friend in Scottsdale, and she had walked into that banquet hall like she already knew everyone in it. Her name was Vivian. She was 53, recently relocated from Chicago after what she described as an amicable divorce. She worked in estate planning, she told me, consulting for families navigating trusts and inheritances. She had that particular kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and not feeling the need to prove it to anyone. My first wife, Carol, had died of ovarian cancer 3 years before that dinner. We'd had 34 years together. I won't try to describe what those 3 years alone felt like. Anyone who's lost the person they built their life around already knows, and anyone who hasn't can quite understand no matter how carefully you explain it. What I will say is that by the time I walked into that retirement dinner, I was starting to feel like the hollow space Carol left might be permanent. Vivian changed that. She laughed at things I said that weren't quite jokes. She asked follow-up questions when I talked about history, real ones, not the polite kind people ask to seem interested. She'd grown up in Wisconsin, gone to school in Madison, spent 20 years in Chicago building a career, and, she said without self-pity, a marriage that had simply run its course. We dated for 14 months. My son Garrett, who lived in Portland with his wife and 2 kids, flew down to Scottsdale twice to meet her. He was 37 then, careful in the way that children of widowed parents learn to be careful. "She seems genuinely happy, Dad," he told me after the second visit. "I just want to make sure you are too, not just relieved." I told him I knew the difference. I'm not sure I did. We got married in a small ceremony in Sedona. Vivian moved into the house Carol and I had owned for 22 years. She was careful about it, considerate in ways I hadn't expected. She asked which things had been Carol's, and she moved around them with a kind of respect that made me feel seen. She suggested we repaint the living room together, pick out new furniture for the porch. Making it ours, she said. Not erasing, just evolving. The first year was good. I want to say that clearly, because what came later can make you want to rewrite everything that came before it, and that wouldn't be honest. There were real dinners, real conversations, real mornings on the back porch watching the desert light change. There were things that felt like a second life being built out of the rubble of grief. About 18 months in, I started having headaches, not the ordinary kind. These would settle behind my right eye and stay for hours, sometimes a full day. My vision would blur occasionally at the edges. I started feeling tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. A kind of bone-deep fatigue that made getting out of bed feel like a project. Vivian was attentive. She drove me to appointments, kept notes on her phone about my symptoms, asked my doctor questions I wouldn't have thought to ask. When my primary care physician, Dr. Tishon Kaminsky, ran blood work and everything came back within normal range, she was the one who suggested we push for a referral to a neurologist. It might be the altitude, I told her. Tucson sits at about 2,400 feet, and I'd only moved there from Ohio 7 years earlier. "Alan, you've lived here for 7 years," she said, not unkindly. "It's not the altitude." The neurologist found nothing definitive. Possible tension headaches, possibly early-stage hypertension affecting circulation, possibly stress. I was 62. My body was making its opinions about aging more clearly known, and it seemed reasonable to attribute things to that. Vivian started making me a morning drink she called a wellness blend. She'd researched it, she said, after finding a nutritionist website that specialized in supplements for men over 60. Magnesium, B12, something called ashwagandha for stress, lion's mane mushroom for cognitive function. It tasted like chalk dissolved in apple juice. I drank it every morning because she made it every morning and because I wanted to believe it was helping. The headaches didn't improve. The fatigue got worse. I started having trouble finding words mid-sentence, something I'd never experienced before. Standing in front of the refrigerator, I'd forget why I'd walked into the kitchen. Carol's voice had always been the loudest in my head, and now even that was growing quieter, harder to access. I started to wonder, with a fear I kept to myself, whether I was in the early stages of something serious. Garrett called again, Vivian mentioned one evening. He's worried about you. He shouldn't be. He asked if you'd considered getting a second opinion on the headaches. She paused. I told him you were already seeing Dr. Kaminsky and the neurologist, that we had it handled. I noticed later, much later, that she hadn't suggested I call him back. Garrett and I talked every Sunday. During one of those calls, I mentioned the word fuck, how my thoughts felt slow sometimes, wrapped in something I couldn't quite push through. Dad, how long has this been going on? He asked. A while. A year, maybe more. The silence on his end lasted a beat too long. Have you told Vivian everything you're feeling? She knows. She's been right there for all of it. Right, he said. Yeah, of course. I didn't understand the flatness in his voice until later. Ed Briggs had been my accountant for 11 years. He'd done Carol's final year of taxes while she was in hospice, never charging me for it. He was the kind of person who made you feel like your financial life was being handled by someone who actually gave a damn. When I walked into his office that February morning and he asked Vivian to wait in the reception area, I knew something was wrong. She can come in, I said. I prefer she didn't, just for now. I sat down across from his desk. He opened a folder and turned it toward me. I could see columns of numbers, account names I didn't recognize. Alan, I've been preparing your taxes for over a decade. You know I'm going to be straight with you. Dad, just say it. He pointed to a line on the page. Last year you received income from the sale of an annuity product. Do you remember opening an annuity account in March of 2 years ago? I stared at the number $63,000. I don't know what that is, I said. The paperwork was filed under your name and Social Security number. The investment firm that issued it is based in Nevada. I've been trying to get documentation from them for 3 weeks. He paused. Alan, this annuity was opened and liquidated within 11 months. Most of the money in it came from transfers out of your IRA. And the proceeds from the liquidation, $63,000, minus significant early withdrawal penalties, were deposited into an account I don't have any record of in your financial profile. My IRA. How was that possible without my authorization? Ed said another page in front of me. I could see my signature at the bottom. I hadn't signed it. I'm a history teacher. I've spent 31 years reading and analyzing primary sources, training myself to look at documents critically. I stared at that signature for a long time. The loops of the A, the way the M in Mercer curved. It was close enough to fool a financial institution processing hundreds of documents a week. But my signature has a specific hesitation in the middle that comes from a hand injury I had in my 40s. I looked for it. It wasn't there. Dad, I said, I didn't sign this. He nodded slowly. I was afraid you'd say that. The fog in my head sharpened into something else entirely, something cold. There's more, he said. He showed me a second account, a joint brokerage account opened 18 months ago under both my name and Vivian's. I hadn't known about this one either. $240,000 had moved through it over the course of 16 months, withdrawn in chunks, deposited into an external account that wasn't listed anywhere in the paperwork. The balance, when Ed discovered it, was $4,000. $240,000. I had saved that money over 30 years, a teacher's salary in Ohio, careful and deliberate about every retirement contribution I ever made. Carol and I used to joke that we were the most boring spenders in our zip code. We meant it as a compliment to ourselves. The account is still technically active, Ed said, but I flagged it with my compliance team and they've recommended we contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Alan, I need to know if you authorized any of this. I told him no. I told him I hadn't known about any of it. He nodded. Then he said something that shifted something fundamental in the architecture of the last 4 years. Alan, in estate planning work, practitioners sometimes have access to sensitive financial data for their clients. Social security numbers, account numbers, signature samples from legal documents. I drove home in silence. I don't remember the drive. Vivian was in the kitchen when I got back making coffee, dressed for what she'd said was a lunch meeting with a client. She looked up when I walked in, and something in my face must have shown because hers shifted slightly. How did it go? Fine, I said, just some confusion on a form. She poured me a cup of coffee and set it on the counter, and I thought about every morning for 4 years, every cup of coffee she'd handed me, every wellness drink she'd mixed in the blender while I sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper like a man who had no idea what was happening in his own house. That afternoon, while she was gone, I went through her home office. I wasn't someone who did things like that. Carol and I had shared everything: finances, passwords, opinions about neighbors. Privacy in our marriage was just the natural space two people give each other, not something either of us had needed to protect from the other. I stood in the doorway of Vivian's office for a long time before I walked in. What I found took me the better part of 2 hours to work through. There were investment statements for 3 accounts I'd never seen. There were insurance documents, a life insurance policy on me, taken out 3 years ago, the day after our first wedding anniversary. $2 million. The beneficiary wasn't listed as Vivian Mercer. It was listed as a name I didn't recognize. Lynette Voss. I took photos of everything with my phone. That evening, I called Garrett. It was late in Portland, almost 11 his time. He answered on the second ring. Dad, what's wrong? I told him everything. The accounts, the forged signature, the insurance policy, the name I didn't recognize. The silence that followed was not like his usual silences. It was the silence of someone who has been carrying a fear they didn't know how to say out loud. Dad, he said finally, the wellness drink she makes you. What about it? How long have you been having these symptoms? The headaches, the fog, the fatigue? I thought back, 18 months, maybe 20. When did she start making you that drink? I didn't answer right away. Dad, I looked up ashwagandha and lion's mane last month, Garrett said. On their own, they're both fine. But I've been worried, and I wanted to understand what you were taking. Some of what you described doesn't match what those supplements do. And I found some forum posts from people who'd had symptoms like yours after being exposed to. He stopped. Dad, please just don't drink it tomorrow. Just one day. And go see a doctor, not one she knows about. I said it out loud then, the word neither of us had been willing to say. You think she's poisoning me? I think we need to know what's actually in that drink. I slept 3 hours that night. Vivian slept next to me, still and quiet, her breathing even and undisturbed. The next morning, I poured the wellness drink down the kitchen drain while she was in the shower. I told her my stomach was off, that I didn't think I could handle anything this morning. She pressed her hand to my forehead and said I felt fine, that I was probably just anxious about whatever Ed had found. By the 3rd day without the drink, something was happening. The fog was lighter. The pressure behind my eye was less constant. I noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound you'd stopped hearing consciously. Suddenly, the room is different, and you realize you'd gotten used to something you shouldn't have gotten used to. On the 4th day, I drove to a walk-in clinic in a part of Tucson I almost never went to. I told the doctor there, a young woman named Dr. Reyes, everything. My symptoms, the timeline, my recent improvement. I told her about the drink. I told her about the drink. I told her what I suspected. She didn't flinch, She ordered a comprehensive metabolic panel and a toxicology screen, and she told me that if someone had been introducing a heavy metal or other toxic compound into my system gradually over an extended period, traces might still be detectable. She put a rush on the results. She also said this: if it comes back the way I think it might, we'll be making a call to the Tucson Police Department. Are you prepared for that? I was 64 years old, sitting in a clinic waiting room with paper on the examination table crinkling under me, and I was preparing myself to discover that the woman I'd married had been trying to kill me. No, I told her I wasn't prepared, but I needed to know. I found out 2 days later. Thallium, the same compound that had been used in Cold War-era poisonings. Tasteless, nearly impossible to detect without specifically looking for it, mimicking the symptoms of natural neurological decline so effectively that it had gone undetected through multiple doctor visits. Doctors to say, Reyes had called me at 7 in the morning, and I'd had to sit down on the kitchen floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. By that afternoon, 2 detectives from the Tucson PD were in my living room. Detective Walsh and Detective Okafor, both calm, both thorough, both making me feel that the ground under my feet, which had been entirely unstable for a week, was at least temporarily solid again. I gave them the photos I'd taken in Vivian's office. I gave them Ed's documentation. I showed them the life insurance policy and the name I didn't recognize, Lynette Boss. Do you know this person? Detective Walsh asked. No. I've never heard Vivian mention that name. Detective Okafor had been typing on his laptop. He turned the screen toward his partner, and they exchanged a look I couldn't read. It took them 72 hours. Vivian's real name was not Vivian Hargrove. That had been a legal name change she'd made 9 years ago in Cook County, Illinois. Before that, her name was Melinda Krause. She had grown up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, attended the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh for 2 years before dropping out, and had been married twice before she married me. Her first husband had died in 2009, a fall down a staircase in their home in Naperville. The death had been ruled accidental. He'd had a life insurance policy for $800,000. Her second husband had died in 2016, a carbon monoxide incident attributed to a faulty furnace in their home in Evanston. Ruled accidental. His policy had paid out $1.2 million. Lynette Voss was her sister. The insurance policy she'd taken out on my life. $2 million, paid to Lynette Voss as beneficiary, a technical workaround to avoid the paper trail of naming herself, had been purchased the month after our first anniversary. According to what the detectives pieced together from phone records and emails recovered from a secondary account I hadn't known about, Vivian had expected the thallium to cause organ failure that would be attributed to natural causes within approximately 3 years of the marriage. Cognitive decline, fatigue, cardiac stress. The symptoms of a man aging normally. Nothing that would raise flags. She hadn't counted on Ed Briggs. The financial crimes she committed were what undid her. The annuity liquidation, the fraudulent transfers out of my IRA, the signature forgery. Those were the things that created documentation, created a paper trail, created an 11-year accountant relationship that had built up enough trust for Ed to call me in and close the door. Detective Walsh told me this in my hotel room 3 days after I'd left the house. Garrett had flown in from Portland by then and was sitting next to me, his hand on my shoulder. He'd been there for 12 hours by that point, and he wasn't going anywhere. She was good, Detective Walsh said. Not as a compliment, only as a fact. 2 prior deaths, no charges. She'd been doing this long enough to know how to look like a devoted spouse. She did look like one, I said. I know. That's how it works. They arrested Melinda, the next morning at a hotel outside Phoenix, where she'd checked in under a name I didn't recognize. She'd known something was closing in. The detectives thought she might have been preparing to run. The trial was 11 months later. I sat through every day of it. I watched her in that courtroom, and I tried to reconcile every memory I had. Every dinner, every morning on the porch, every hand held in a doctor's waiting room, with what I now knew had been happening underneath. I couldn't do it. The 2 things existed in separate compartments, and I'm not sure they'll ever merge entirely. A forensic accountant testified about the wire transfers, the forged documents, the insurance scheme. A toxicologist testified about thallium poisoning, about how precisely calibrated the dosing had been, about how much longer I likely had if I hadn't stopped. A detective from Naperville, Illinois, testified about a staircase in 2009. A gas company technician from Evanston testified about a furnace that had shown no signs of malfunction before that night in 2016. Garrett testified, too, about a father who sounded different on the phone, about a daughter-in-law who'd been careful to keep those Sunday calls short. The jury took 9 hours. She was convicted on 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, fraud, identity fraud, and forgery. The murders of her previous husbands were reopened and absorbed into the federal charges. The judge sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. When they let her out, she didn't look at me. I'm not sure what I would have done if she had. The financial recovery was long and incomplete. The IRS helped me recover some of what had been taken to the fraudulent annuity. Most of the brokerage account was gone. A victim restitution order was issued, but orders like that are often symbolic. I've come to accept that the money is largely lost, and that what I have left is still more than enough to live carefully on for the rest of my life. It's a thing I have to remind myself of occasionally when I feel the anger flare up again. What I've had more trouble accepting is how willing I was not to see it. I was a history teacher. I spent 3 decades training students to look at primary sources critically, to question the official account, to ask who benefits and who is harmed. And I came home every night and drank the drink she made me and explained away my own symptoms and was grateful, genuinely grateful for the attentiveness of someone who was quietly trying to end my life. I've talked to a therapist about this. Dr. Nunze, a woman in her 50s who practices out of an office on Speedway with plants she tends so carefully they look painted. She has told me that what happened to me is not a failure of intelligence or instinct, that predators like this are specifically skilled at creating environments that disable your skepticism, that grief and loneliness are not character flaws. They're human conditions that make us reachable, and some people know precisely how to exploit that. I understand it intellectually. The emotional understanding comes and goes. Garrett calls me every day now. He wanted me to move to Portland, and I considered it seriously for a while. But I've lived in Tucson for 9 years. I've got friends here, people from the high school I still have coffee with, a neighbor named Henry who walks his elderly basset hound past my house every morning and stops to argue about baseball with me over the fence. This is my life. I wasn't going to let her take that from me, too. I did sell the house. I moved into a smaller place about 2 miles away, closer to the university. I donated the porch furniture. I bought a new kitchen table. Small things that felt larger than they were. What I know now, and try to pass along when I talk to the fraud victim support group I joined last spring, is this. The warning signs were there. Vivian had gradually, almost imperceptibly, made herself the center of my world, my doctor appointments, my finances, my daily routine. All of it filtered through her. She'd discouraged, subtly and without anyone comment I could point to, the friendships that might have given me an outside perspective. She'd positioned herself as the person who understood my health decline, the person I should trust to manage it. And I had let her, because she seemed to love me and because it's hard when you're lonely and someone chooses you to question why. Garrett saved my life. Ed saved my life. Dr. Reyes saved my life. And whatever instinct it was that made me pour that drink down the drain instead of asking about it directly, that saved my life too. If you're reading this and something in it sounds familiar, not the dramatic parts but the small ones, the way your support system has narrowed, the way you find yourself explaining your own concerns away, the way someone who loves you keeps looking at you with an expression you can't quite name. Trust that feeling. Get a second opinion. Call your kid. Call your accountant, your old friend, your neighbor with the basset hound. The people who knew you before know things about you that you can no longer see clearly from inside. I'm 64 years old. I'm alive because an accountant closed a door and told me the truth. I'm standing here in my smaller house with my smaller life, watching the February light come over the Catalina Mountains the way it does in Tucson when the sky finally makes up its mind about spring. That's enough. Today, that's more than enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the arrest, not the verdict, not even the morning Dr. Reyes called with the test results. It's the moment I stood at the kitchen sink and poured that drink down the drain. Such a small thing. A decision that took maybe 3 seconds, and it was the one that kept me alive. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any mystical sense. I'm a history teacher. I tend to look at things in terms of chains of events, what led to what, which hinge moments change the direction of everything. And what I keep seeing when I trace it all back is that every person who helped me was acting out of a commitment to something specific. Ed Briggs had spent 11 years building a practice on the principle that his clients deserved the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable to deliver. Dr. Zevin Reyes had taken an oath to treat the patient in front of her without judgment. Garrett had been watching his father with the quiet, patient concern of a son who loves his parent enough to say the difficult thing instead of the comfortable one. None of them looked away. That's what I keep coming back to. They all had the easier option, and none of them took it. I was less honest than any of them. With myself, I mean. I told myself the fatigue was aging. I told myself the fog was grief catching up to me. I told myself that a woman who made me feel less alone after 3 years of profound loneliness couldn't possibly be the source of my decline. I had the information. The symptoms were real. The timeline was clear. Garrett had been trying to tell me something for months in the space between his words. I just didn't want to know. And there's a particular kind of damage that comes from choosing not to know. It compounds quietly until someone else has to come and show you what you refuse to see yourself. What I've had to rebuild isn't just trust in other people. It's trust in my own mind. The thallium did physical damage, some of which may be permanent. But the other thing Vivian took from me, or that I let her take, was my confidence in my own perception. She had been slowly rewriting my reality, and I had been helping her do it by explaining away every alarm my body and my instincts raised. Recovering from that has required a different kind of effort than the physical recovery. It's required me to take my own observations seriously again, to believe what I notice, to stop performing certainty I don't actually feel. I think about the young people Garrett teaches at his firm, the ones just starting out, and I hope none of them ever need the lesson I learned. But if they do, I hope they learn it cheaper than I did, the willingness to look clearly at what's in front of you, even when it costs you something. That's not a small thing. It's the thing that separates the people who survive difficult situations from the ones who don't, and the resilience to keep going after the ground has been knocked out from under you, to sell the house and buy a smaller table and show up to a support group on a Thursday night when you'd rather be anywhere else. That's not weakness wearing a different mask. That's what getting up looks like. I'm alive. I'm in a smaller house with better light. My son calls every day and I let him because I've learned that the people who worry about you are not a burden. They're the infrastructure. They're the thing that holds. That's what Ed and Garrett and Dr. Reyes were for me, and I will spend the rest of whatever time I have left being that for someone else.